Hey, this is Gary.
This is Mike.
And Daniel. We're not professionals. We're just three addicts sharing our experiences, strength, and hope regarding recovery.
Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other addicts and to practice these principles in our lives.
Welcome to another episode of the 12th Step Podcast. This is Mike.
And this is Gary.
And this is Daniel.
Good to be here.
Yes.
Good to be here. We're focusing on several emails that have come our way, and these are great. These are fantastic emails. I appreciate everybody obviously checking in with us and asking questions and asking us to address specific issues. So I appreciate that, and we very much love hearing from our listeners.
Yes, we are.
I am going to read. I'm going to read an email from S. Hi, 12 Step Podcast. I really appreciate your podcast. I often listen to it on the way to work. It really helps me in my recovery. I am 8 months sober. That's fantastic. I'm 8 months sober from all of my bottom lines. All of my bottom lines, including acting out with sex workers. I'm feeling hopeful and going to SAA and SLAA meetings regularly, listening to your podcast and doing the steps. I am currently on steps 2 and 3. I love steps 2 and 3. This would be a great discussion. I came across a quote I wanted to share with you. The young man who rings the bell at the brothel is unconsciously looking for God. Carl Jung wrote something similar when he wrote to Bill Wilson, co-founder of AAA, saying he thought that alcoholism was the search for wholeness for a union with God. I think the high acting out gave me was the incorrect feeling of being close to God, of feeling whole, however momentarily. Or also that acting out worked as an anesthetic, numbing my pain and despair, tricking me into thinking this new feeling was wholeness. Now in recovery, I'm learning that the despair and longing that I sometimes feel is also a sort of spiritual hunger, that I can fill it with self-love, that I don't need to fill it by acting out. This gives me a lot of serenity. I don't need to go to the brothel to find God. I can find him in other places. I just wanted to share this with you, as I'm curious to know what you think, and I definitely get a kick out of you guys discussing it and me listening to it on my way to work. Thank you very much for your work and the podcast. Signed, S. That is a fantastic email. We enjoy, obviously, this will be a great discussion, so I'm looking forward to it. To jump into a couple of things that stand out to me, as I mentioned, I absolutely loved steps 2 and 3. Those were powerful, powerful steps for me. Powerful moments for me, partly because even though I grew up in a strictly religious home, I don't think I'd ever really addressed the two particular things that the identification of who a higher power was for me in a true sense, and the idea that I'm in this place and that this higher power could actually make me more than I was, or could make me better or different than I was, could help me from where I was at. So those were two things that came out of step 2 and 3 for me that were absolutely big moments. But obviously he doesn't want to address, he's going through that right now. What he's really focusing on in my mind is this idea that if I've gone to a brothel, it's this idea that I'm really looking to find peace and serenity and God, as he describes it, which is a fascinating idea. I'm assuming we all had that very similar experience. Is that right?
Oh, for sure. I have lots of thoughts on this. I'm going to let
Gary is just over here beaming.
No. I'm going to let Mike do his thing, but no, I definitely have some stuff I want to chime in on.
Yeah, I had those. Part of what I was seeking in all of my acting out behavior, which included brothels and the very things that he's identifying here, sex workers, all of that sort of stuff, was this. I was always in search of the what I had in my mind as being the ideal experience. It would include all the things that I had felt like that my own personal life lacked, whether it was power and control or just an incredible union, an incredible, all the things that I had defined that what I thought sex was supposed to bring and didn't. And that would be this ultimate experience of wholeness, if you will, just as he's described, this wholeness. And it never did. Mm-hmm. It just never did. Never at any point in time did any of those experiences ever translate into connection or wholeness or even good experience. In fact, one of my very last days of acting out, when I really knew I was in trouble, I went from experience to experience to experience. I think I'd spent over $2,000 in one day. And it was this effort to, and I like I said, I ran from one experience to the next. I had them lined up back to back. Nope, that wasn't it. And so I went to the next one. I would schedule the next one. And it was entirely days of trying, at least a 24-hour period where I was trying to find this ultimate experience.
Yep.
And it never came to be. So I absolutely know what it is he's talking about and what he was looking for and never finding. I get that. Your thoughts, Gary? I know I apologize. I talk long and lengthy.
Oh, but they're good. They're good words, man. You just keep going. It's great.
No, I'm right there with you, and I did very much the same things. But the idea, I'm reminded of the idea of asking myself, kind of this self-reflective question: where do I turn for peace?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where do I find my comfort? The reality of it is that I've come to learn that only God, only my higher power can supply the kind of peace, the kind of serenity that I need as I weather the storms of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I really agree with what they're saying, that, you people try to find their peace. They try to find this solace. They try to find this serenity in places where it can't be found.
Mm-hmm.
You can be distracted by the pleasure. You can be comforted momentarily by the diversion, but ultimately it leaves you less than you were before. So the idea of, the alcoholic who goes to the bar is looking for his connection to God. The person who goes to the brothel is looking for God. That's absolutely true. And insert drug of choice here.
Mm-hmm.
When people are and they're hungry for it, they're starved for this meaning and for this peace that can only come through this spiritual growth and the lessons that we learn in steps 2 and 3, and no, I think I just like Mike, I had those same kind of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
If it could have been found in the places that I was looking, I would have found it.
Yeah.
I looked long and hard, but it can't give you something that it doesn't have.
Yeah.
Whatever it, and I'm speaking in general terms, not to be offensive or to cover up my own personal experience, but to include whatever experiences our listeners might be having. Whatever substitute you're using for your higher power isn't going to fill that void, isn't going to fill the gaps in your soul, or you have to know that can only be found,
Mm-hmm.
From God.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the same thing, except for my story is a little different. So, and I've mentioned this many times on the podcast, I grew up in a very abusive family, very abusive home. And what I find fascinating is the correlation of when my addiction started. So for most of my childhood, I had a safe haven. When things got too bad, I got to go to my grandparents. That was my safe haven. That's where I could end up going and I would be okay. My grandfather had a double heart attack when I was 11, and then no one was allowed to go there anymore. I could visit for an hour or two, but I could not stay there anymore. 11 is exactly when I started getting into pornography. It was underneath the sink because that's where it was in my house, and it gave me that, because of the abuse and that, it allowed that sense of peace. It numbed me out. I didn't have to feel those things, and that just that just continued to happen. I'd fall back on that. That's that addictive cycle. But God in my mind, because family wasn't super, they didn't go to church and stuff like that very much. We'd watch the Ten Commandments, stuff like that. But in my mind, because the only example I had with a father figure or like God was, the father figure I had growing up, which was very vengeful and wrathful and punishing. And then you watch, the Ten Commandments and see, what happens to Egypt and the Pharaoh and all that. And you're just, a young mind just builds, okay, I'm not the greatest human being out there. There's all these other great people. I'm just garbage. God hates me. He put me in this family, blah, blah, blah. These negative thought processes that a young kid has. And so I reading this, really going through steps 2 and 3, you kind of put that into perspective that that's what I've always been searching for.
Mm-hmm.
But I never knew it. I was leaning on the addiction instead, when really it was coming to my higher power, coming to God, to find healing from that. And now, even though I've had this addiction, as we've talked in other podcasts, I'm actually grateful for it.
Mm-hmm.
4.5 years clean, that's amazing and fantastic. But more so, I'm grateful for the experiences I've had, because now I can help others.
Mm-hmm.
And I can use my experience to help them and help them see that despite what they've been through, it's not as bad as they think, like I used to think. And then I came into the program and I saw other people like, wow, there are other people that have gone through this. So I'm not the only one. I'm not as broken as I thought. And all these other thought processes that you start unwinding. And I think that is, that's our higher power working through us to help others. So it's just amazing reading through this and all the examples.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic email. There's no question about it. There's so much here. One of the things I wanted to point out also is this idea and identity of God or our higher power. There's a very distinct distinction between who that individual is and who we define, or how that person is, or what that power looks like, or whatever, and religiosity. I want to be real clear about that, because I think sometimes that we have these misunderstandings that go along in the religiosity side. I know, for instance, in my own faith, one of the things that comes up an awful lot is this idea is the way we understand God is we define him an awful lot like being our own mortal father, right?
Yep.
That we have this relationship with him in that same fashion. And yet that there's just that I can't now in recovery I can't wrap my head around that, because what I don't believe in is a God who loses his shit basically when he finds out that I did something wrong and wants to wipe me off the face of the earth because he's mad at me, or he has these mortal feelings and emotions, because I just don't believe in that, right? I mean, I read my own scriptures and find out that they say stuff like God is love, and yet we talk about these things so distinctly as though, and yet we talk about them in terms of human emotion. I'm angry at you because you did something wrong, or my love for you is conditional because you aren't doing what I want you to do, or all those sorts of things that my mortal experience was all about is not how I define my relationship with God. And that's really, really, really important, particularly as you work through steps 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
It's different in terms of religiosity, and let's not take the way that we define it sometimes in religiosity in terms of finding our higher power.
Yeah,
that's the important thing.
No, and you're spot on. That's exactly how I did it. I equated my God with my father. That was very heavy-handed in how he dealt with things. And as I've gotten through my recovery, as I've connected more to my higher power, I've found that even I'm changing how I do things with my own kids. Like I've said before in a previous podcast, how my parenting has changed. I can't tell you the number of times in the past where I've told my kids, I'm like, I hate the way you're acting, or I hate you and the way you're being right now. And now I've changed that to, I don't like the behavior you're using.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I realize, not only was that how I was treated when I was younger, but I'm realizing when I'm saying I hate you, that's an attack on them.
Uh-huh.
And that's telling them I'm not good, I'm bad. Where now it's like, no, I don't like your behavior that you're using. And that tells them, hey, I have a choice in using this behavior, and it's the behavior Dad doesn't like. And I think that's how at least in my mind, my higher power is like, I don't like this behavior you're using. It's not that I don't like you, it's the behavior I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And that really has been a huge change for me. Not only in my own recovery, but how I deal with other people. Pointing out what I don't like instead of saying I don't like you, or I don't like, or I hate you, something like that. I don't like this. And then we can open up, we can have a discussion, and things work out in a much better fashion. And I do believe that's how our higher power works. It's the addiction, it's the addictive behavior that the higher power doesn't like, not us.
I think...
Right.
I think that one of the purposes of life is you're seeking meaning.
Mm-hmm.
You were seeking this, what does he say, wholeness? This union with God, the wholeness. And
Yes.
I think that's one of the purposes of life, actually. And I think that that's why we have to go through challenges, and why things have to be hard is we need to learn what steps 2 and 3 teach, that we come to rely on our higher power, on our Father. And while I think that there is some utility, in the comparison to a father. I think to draw that too, can be problematic, like you guys have both expressed. But I'm reminded a little bit of a story, as we're seeking with God. And this story comes from the New Testament. And I don't know if you guys, and I've come to think of my recovery a little bit like this. So I'll share this real quick, and you guys can tell me what you think. Seeking this wholeness, this oneness with God, So I'm reminded a little bit of. Do you remember when Christ walked on the water?
Mm-hmm.
So he's walking out to the ship, and at first they look out and they see him and they think he's a specter. It's like it's in the fourth watch, and I think that's like 3 a.m. or 3 to 6 a.m, something like that. And so they see him walking out on the water, and it talks about the winds and the waves being contrary, working against you, frustrating, things like that. And then he calls out and he says, to Peter, or Peter calls out and says, if that's you, call to me and I'll walk out to you. And so, Jesus does. And so Peter walks out there and he makes it some way, walking on the water, which is miraculous in itself, and then begins to sink as his focus is diverted, or looking around what's going on around him. And he calls out to the Lord, and the Lord pulls him up out of the water, right? And then they begin this journey back to the ship. And the piece of the story that stands out to me is, or that I really like, is it wasn't until they got to the ship that the waters were calmed. So what I take from that is, when you set out on recovery, and you're called of God and you exercise the faith to go out there, that's very miraculous in and of itself, and you're doing a lot of things, but, and when you get distracted, or when you try to find your solace or your peace in the things of the world, you sink, you're pulled down, because that's not what it's for.
Yeah.
But the piece that I like, or the piece of this story that kind of stood out to me, was on the journey back, once Peter had called out to the Lord, and the Lord brought him back up, and they started walking back to the ship. The nature of the challenge didn't change. The sea was still rough. The winds were still contrary. It was still a rough go, And as I've gone through my recovery, and I still have those difficult times or those challenges, I remember that the walk back wasn't still supposed to be hard. I still have to go through this stuff. I still have to overcome it. But I'm looking for my peace or my wholeness where it can be found.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. So it kind of reminds me of something else. I have a friend that just, he reads Hebrew and other things, and kind of scholarly. So I just kind of looked this up while you're speaking. So the Hebrew word that was translated as perfect is tamim. And it also means whole, healthful, and having integrity.
Right.
And then the Greek translation of the Old Testament uses the word teleios, which means to mean it translates to perfect, but it also translates to complete and entire. So learning that, it didn't mean that I had to be perfect. It just means that I had to be whole, be helpful, to have integrity, to be complete.
Right. And do you know that?
And I can work towards being complete, but I can't work towards being perfect. And that was such a huge problem.
Well, that's
finding my recovery.
In fact, even the word complete implies a process.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, to become so, it implies a process. And I love that. You know,
yeah, and so having that change in my mentality of, okay, I don't need to be perfect. I just need to work towards being complete.
Right.
Or I need to work towards being whole or healthy or having integrity. Those are all things I can work towards.
Exactly.
And by doing that, it made everything shift as in my recovery, in my my thought processes, even in my relationships, because working towards being complete means I can make mistakes. It means I can stumble, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to continue moving forward.
It also means that by implication, if there's a process to go through to become complete, then working through that process is ennobling.
Yeah.
Does that make that? And I love that. To me, that is so encouraging, because sometimes that process is very difficult, but going through that process is headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I love that. Love that.
Oftentimes I think we think that this process is supposed to be pretty and graceful as well. And the reality of it is it isn't, right? I mean, when we consider our own past, and when I look at my own past of the last 8, 10, well, even my whole entire life, it hasn't been pretty. It hasn't been, I mean, my addictive behavior started when I was very, very young. And I think of the double life that I've lived. That the life that I was during the day and the life that I was at night were entirely two different people in a lot of ways. And so now I'm able to bring these two lives together and actually live one life. I don't consider that to be pretty. I don't consider it to be, it may be complete and it may be in a work in process, but it wasn't lovely. It wasn't all those sorts of things. Sometimes it's just plain hard.
Well, yeah, but and that's the point that I liked about the story that I shared is I think that's kind of the point too. I think it's intended to be hard. I think that's part of the plan. And as weird as this is going to sound, if going through this life looking for meaning means that I have to go through difficult things and overcome them, okay, then when things are hard, I can take comfort in that, because I'm rest assured that part of the plan seems to be working.
Yeah.
So then by inference, I can assume that the rest is going to work out too.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah, that makes great sense. Sure.
Well, I mean,
I said, if inference gets us there, then you're right.
Yeah.
I know, right? It's
well, I mean, so there's a movie called Arthur the King. It stars Mark Wahlberg, but in that it's about a group of people that do adventure racing. So basically, everyone starts at the same starting point, and they have an end point. How they get there, it doesn't matter. They get to choose. They can take shortcuts. They can go anywhere they want, as long as they get to each checkpoint, and then get to the end. It doesn't matter, and so during this race, you see them making their own choices on making these shortcuts. There's one time they're doing a shortcut. They get they find the zip line where they're going across, and as one gal's going across, the thing seizes up. And so the other guy comes in, the two are out there dangling, and they're like, okay, I'm going to unclip, grab a hold of you, swing over to the other side, clip back in, and then we're going to unclip you and then go on. But there's all these different things. But every team is trying to get to the same end, just like all of us are in this journey. So all of our journeys are different. But what this really kind of told me is like, it didn't mean that each time they went was easier. If they would have gone the route everyone else did, there probably would have been problems or issues there. I mean, you see a time before where he goes to make a shortcut and he ends up losing the tide in a previous race, and this is like the last race, and he can't do this. But and it was really interesting that even though they had challenges, they still worked through them. They still had setbacks, even though they were making shortcuts. Even in the end, they don't win. It kind of sucks. You'd think, oh, they're going to win, but they make a choice to save someone else. And it happens to be this dog that they find along the way. And they get to the end, and one of the racers go, if you wouldn't have gone back for that dog, you would have won. And he's like, but if we wouldn't have gone back, we would have lost. You know, because this dog, this random stray dog, was side by side with him the entire length of this race. It's actually based on a true story. But I like that, that if they hadn't gone back, they would have lost. And they didn't feel like they lost even though they came in second, because they made the right choice. They overcame a lot of difficulties. I mean, one of their guys literally got dehydrated. And he's like, I can go. And they're like, no. We got here way faster than anyone else. We're going to wait. We're going to take the 4-hour break. And then we're going to run for all we're worth because we're going to be fully up. And they did. Again, that was another sacrifice they made, because had they not, he probably would have collapsed or something like that. So it's a really great movie. But it just goes to show with our lives, we'll run into those issues. It's not always going to be good. Even when we take shortcuts, we're going to run into difficulties. And I like the fact where you brought up, we all have our own paths. And even then, you know, and I've mentioned this many times before, you know, I feel like even when I make mistakes or even when I'm doing things, my higher power is playing chess. He's always several moves ahead. And if I make a move that's maybe contrary to what he thought, he starts to rearrange those pieces so that I can still get to where he wants me to be. It just may take longer for me to get there because of that different route I've gone.
I have one more thought. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just listening to what Daniel was saying, and I you know, one of the things that I've struggled with through all of my recovery is this idea that I'm dealing with a God that knows all things from the beginning to the end. All things are before my face, right? And so I've wondered about that as it relates to my own recovery. All things are before me. I know I'm Alpha Omega, beginning and end, first and the last. All those sorts of ideas that I hear so often that. I remember one of my very first early conversations with a fellow in our group who was saying, well, you know, God's so disappointed in me, and disappointment is this idea that I knew where you were going to go, or I had expected so much more from you, sort of that mortal experience, right? My dad knows me, but I acted in some way that I didn't, that was so out of character that he was disappointed, right? And I struggle with that. I've worked through that my own self to say, you know, I think God knows me so well. Well, let me say my higher power. And, you know, I may use the word God, but that's who I've defined as my higher power. But I think he knows me so well, so intimately, that nothing surprises him. I just can't believe in a God that ever gets surprised. Well, I just can't believe in him.
You know,
that's how I have to deal with that.
So it's kind of interesting because I look back on my recovery. And the very things that absolutely destroyed me and put me in a place where I wanted to cease to be, now that I look back on them, they are the experiences that that kind of made me who I am. And I've often mused on the idea, I wonder if I could be what I am today without having had to go through something like that, to go through that or something like it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so while
sense to
I
me,
think
yes.
I think it's absolutely necessary that we have to learn to turn our will and lives over to our higher power. You know what I mean? I think that's necessary. I think steps 2 and 3 illustrate that really well. But at the same time, I also think that we each have to go through something.
Yeah.
And I think it's intended to be hard, you know, and I think as long as we continue to try to find our peace or our solace or this oneness with God in the bars and the brothels and the distractions of the world, we'll never find it. But I do think that's what we're all kind of hungering for or seeking for.
Yeah, and brings us there. And brings us there. Yeah.
But I also absolutely believe that when we work steps 2 and 3 and we do turn our lives over to the care of a loving and caring higher power, that nothing in our life's experience is wasted.
Yeah.
I think that all of those things can and will be turned to our benefit and good, and that we can, if we're grateful and we look for the gifts and we go through the process the way that we should, that we will be better for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. I and kind of going back to what Mike was saying, this is my envision of it is, it's kind of like a tree, it branches out. I think our higher power sees all the various branches, all the deviations and everything. We have that choice. I do think sometimes he is surprised. I do think sometimes he's disappointed because it's like, okay, you have three choices here. Here's the one I really want you to do. This one's kind of the middle ground. This is the one I really hope you don't do. And we get to choose those because we have agency and we pick that. If it's the one he really doesn't hope, he's like, oh man, I and it's not because he hates that we've done that. He just knows the hardships that we're going to go through down that branch. But he knows that branch eventually connects back to that middle one. And if we travel down that middle one long enough, it gets us back to the one he originally wanted us to. It's just those hardships we go through. But not only that, it kind of goes back to what you were saying, where we kind of need those hardships and those things to learn. And I'm going to quote a movie, The Matrix, when they talk about, wow, we lost whole crops of, fields of crops because we made a life that was perfect, and your human brain could not accept that. And I think that it's kind of built into us. We have to have those hardships to grow, to mature, to be complete. Because if everything is just handed to us, we don't really grow.
I think
we don't
Carl
learn
Jung
anything.
said something about that too.
Yeah. We don't grow, we don't mature, we don't evolve. If everything's given to us, everything is perfect, we wouldn't have the addiction, we wouldn't have these challenges, and we would just kind of be flatlined.
Well, no, I think that's kind of the point, is we have to go through these challenges and find meaning.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I was going to say, just on sort of a note to finish up on, coming back to steps 2 and 3, the whole process of giving oneself to a higher power is so recovery oriented, right? I mean, if you think about that, everything about my addictive behavior was all about me, and satisfying my needs and my wants and my whatever. And the idea of recognizing that idea is broken, that it's not functioning, it's not working, and I'm in a bad place as a result of it, and now having to give that whole thing to a power that's been difficult for me to define. It's been all those sorts of things in my entire mortal existence, even coming from a really religious home. All of those sorts of things hard to define is it's really empowering. It's this idea of just simply saying, I can't do this. I'm clearly outside of I'm way outside of my punk coverage here. I can't deal with this. Yeah. And there's something very, very healing about all of that. Very cathartic to go through all of that. So congratulations to S for actually moving in that direction. These are great steps to work on, great things to really help you out as you move through, because it's the basis that's going to carry you through step 12.
Yep.
So I'm assuming that we are way past time.
We are.
We are. I do have one thought I want to... And
go for it, and then we can wrap up.
Please,
so this conversation does remind me of a scripture that from the New Testament that really kind of helps me, and this is in John 14:27. Not that I get into the habit of quoting a lot of scripture on this thing, but I think that this is particularly relevant. Right. It says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world gives do I give unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." The message is at least to me, is that we all are seeking that wholeness, and it's not what the world would give us. It's not found in the brothels. It's not found in the bars. It's not found in the various distractions or pleasurable things of this life. I think it comes from turning our life and wills over to the tender care of a higher power who actually does care for us and who does have a plan.
Yeah.
And I think if we surrender to that process, then we'll find meaning outside of ourselves in all the experiences that we go through. And I think we'll find that we can be grateful for the things that we've gone through without necessarily wanting to go through those things again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's been
Yeah.
my experience. And anyway,
And we'll find a wholeness that
the
we
plan is working.
Yeah, we'll
You
find
can-
a wholeness that we weren't expecting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can tell it's working because things are hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're still okay.
We're still okay.
Yep.
I can do hard
Still
things.
okay. Very good. What a great discussion. And thank you, S, for reaching out. We
Mhm.
really appreciate that.
Yep.
So with that, this is Mike saying, do the work necessary to find the peace that recovery brings.
And this is Gary saying, do the next right thing.
And this is Daniel saying, find the humility in your recovery.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like this episode, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find us.
As a fellowship of recovering addicts, Sex Addicts Anonymous offers a message of hope to anyone who suffers from sex addiction. Check out saa-recovery.org.